Macca's Guides.
Hey everyone, Mac here playing Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and in this video I'll be showing you a quest line that ultimately allows you to turn your human frame into an ancient dragon. Along the way, we'll also receive a bunch of armor, gear, and weapons too. Now you can start off this quest really early on in the game as soon as you reach the castle front site of Grace. You'll want to just follow the path. You'll come to these worms, and as you're making your way up, you may also discover a site of Grace. You'll also see and hear an NPC crying out, and this is Igon. Now here you have two options. You can take Igon out and you get all of his armor, which seems like it could be useful, but it's actually better to leave him alone. Unfortunately, I didn't know that, so in my gameplay, you will see me take him out. It's completely up to you. You can finish the quest line either way. You may have some better luck if you let him live, though. You'll also get his bell bearing, which you can take back to the round table and then use his shop there. Now, from his location, which is the Pillar Path waypoint, we can continue heading to the south, following the path of dragons down low, and this path will eventually lead to an Invader. The Invader is called the Ancient Dragon Man, and your luck may vary. I found him to be pretty easy, beating him on my first time without even knowing he would be here. He does inflict some bleed, and he's quite quick, but you should make work of him. If not, come back after getting some Erdtree fragments. Then you can just continue following the path. The path will lead to a cave, and then that cave is called the Dragon's Pit, which is basically a dungeon, but also an entrance into a new area. The Dragon's Pit itself is pretty simple. As you enter, make sure you activate that Site of Grace, and like with all dungeons, your general goal is to work your way downward. There will be some enemies here. You are free to fight all of them. There will also be a magma worm halfway through. It's basically a little bit of a mini boss, but it does drop a couple of smithing stones, which is really useful. But ultimately, your goal is to get to the very end of the Dragon's Pit, where you'll find a giant opening in the ground. If you jump on through, you'll make your way all the way to the bottom where you can find the boss of the dungeon. There's also a stake down here, so don't worry if you fail against the boss. You don't have to do the entire dungeon again. Now, this boss is pretty straightforward. I would say if you're struggling, your main way to beat him would be to get more Erdtree fragments. I don't think that there's any problem with using a Mimic Tier if it makes you have more fun in the game, so feel free to use that. And personally, I didn't find my high dex weapon very useful against this enemy. You may find something with higher strength more suitable to get him stun locked. But when you do defeat the Ancient Dragon Man, the boss of the dungeon, you'll get the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana, which is a fantastic weapon, and I would highly recommend you bring it back to the round table, and given if you have enough stones, you can level it up to level +10. Once completed, instead of fast traveling to the beginning of the dungeon, you can then head through the door and find a new site of Grace called the Dragon's Pit Terminus. This is the beginning of a new area called Jagged Peaks. If you want the map fragment for this area, it is a part of Southern Shores, and that map fragment is available in the Cerulean Coast. I have a separate video for that if you want to have a map from here on out. After you exit the dungeon, you can travel east to reach the foot of the Jagged Peak. It's the only direction you can actually go, and as the area opens up, we should notice our first dragon of many that we'll be defeating during this quest line. This is the Jagged Peak Drake, and I wish I could give you some great tips on how to beat it, but it actually flew away from me, got stuck behind a rock, glitched through the map, and died. So I didn't even get to enjoy this fight to its full potential. Mostly though, you'll probably just stick within its feet. Feel free to summon your Mimic Tier, and just make sure to avoid its attacks when possible. You will be given a Dragon Heart and the Dragon Scale Flesh upon defeating it, and from this location, you want to head southward. If you have the map fragment, it should be pretty obvious where you're supposed to go, but if not, you can head directly south from that lake. Just keep following the very linear path until you find a site of Grace in front of you. This is going to be called the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion. Feel free to rest here, but the most important thing to do is to talk to the NPC nearby. During the conversation, you will have a dialogue choice, and you'll want to choose Devour Draconic Essence. At this point, you can return to where we just slayed our previous dragon, which was northward. Once you reach that lake, you want to start heading to the east and up the mountain. There's really only one way for you to go. You'll eventually come to a bridge, and you'll reach a new site of grace called Foot of the Jagged Peak. From the Foot of the Jagged Peak site of grace, you are just around the corner from a big dragon fight, where 2 Jagged Peak drakes will be fighting each other. You can actually sit back and just wait for one of them to win the fight, and then you can just slay the other one, but you'll need to take care of both dragons either way. A pretty OP strategy is actually to attack the dragon that is currently winning. This will make your fight as easy as possible once one of them is eliminated. However, if you are a little bit more brave, feel free to just ride into the fight horseback and start slaying some dragons. Taking care of both of them will finish this little section of the quest. Also, at this point, if you didn't eliminate Igon right at the very beginning of the quest line, he should be in this location. You'll hear him laughing, and you'll approach him. He'll be right in the center of the area. As a reward, you will get Igon's Furled Finger, which will allow you to summon him as an NPC in the final fight of this quest. From here, you then want to continue east, and you'll notice a couple of those wind channels that you can ride up. Our goal is to get to the very peak of the mountain, so as long as you're headed up, you are headed in the right direction. You'll then reach a path where a bunch of boulders start flying towards you. Make sure you dodge those by going around. And right where the boulders fall off of the cliff, you can also find a Erdtree fragment. Make sure you pick this one up. It's going to help you later on in the video. And then you just want to continue around the corner and follow the path in the only direction it lets you. Here you'll have to fight Ancient Dragon Senessax, which is the second hardest dragon we'll have to fight for this quest line. I'd recommend trying to stay on horseback for as long as possible. I found that dragons were easier if you were able to use Torrent. And of course, summon that Mimic Tier if you so desire. As long as you're having fun, I support it. The boss does have a pretty large health pool, around 40,000, but they do also just spend a lot of time on the ground, and their attacks can be very easily avoided while on Torrent, as a lot of them will shoot electricity into the ground, and having Torrent allows you to easily and quickly double jump out of the way. So you're basically just going to be doing laps around the boss until it comes to rest. When it does come to rest, try to get in as many attacks as possible, and heal when you have to. Try to just get it down as quickly as possible in order to defeat it. You'll then spend the next minute or two riding up the hill. You're looking to go up and find wind channels. There will be at least 3 of those wind channels that will bring you higher and higher to the very peak of the mountain. So you'll have to run up a hill, take a couple of paths along the edge of the cliffs, find another hill, and then another couple of wind channels. You can only really head one direction. If you get turned around, you'll be heading down the hill and end up where you were. But once you get to the very top, you should find your final site of grace before the boss, which is the Jagged Peak Summit site of grace. Like I stated, the fight against Bayle is quite difficult, but there are a couple of things that can really help you out. If Igon is alive and you didn't kill him like I did at the very beginning of the quest, you can summon him as an NPC to help fight alongside you. Their symbol will be on the ground near the entrance of the arena in gold. Interact with it. Additionally, you can also, on top of that, summon your Mimic Tier. Just be careful that you don't get attacked as you enter. You can get attacked before you can get it off and get one-shot killed if you don't have enough health. Otherwise, the strategy here is to sweep the leg, and there is only one leg to choose from in this case. You'll also find yourself not only battling the dragon itself, but battling the camera angle, as it is probably the hardest part of the fight. There are a couple of different attacks that it will do. A lot of them will also seem very similar. You'll have to learn those patterns and how to deal with them, and you want to watch out for them. I will say in this fight, I found audio to be particularly helpful. If you do enough damage to the Drake here, you will summon the second phase. While it's flying around, I would recommend locking onto it and running towards it. It will then dive bomb into the arena, and you will have to dodge it and continue your full-on assault. For my weapon, I am using the fully leveled Dragon Hunter's Great Katana, which we unlocked earlier in the quest line, And if you are really struggling, you can always level up your Erdtree Blessing level in order to do more damage and get more damage negation to just make the fight significantly easier. The Mimic tier won't get a lot of hits in, but it does sometimes get the aggro of the dragon, which can be very helpful in certain sections. This allows you to heal up and use incantations that will give you power buffs if necessary, and eventually you should be able to take care of Bayle the Dread, one of the harder boss battles, at least in my experience. The drop from this fight is the Heart of Bayle. After completing the fight, you'll also get a new Site of Grace, which is called Rest of the Dread Dragon, and at this point you can fast travel back to the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion. The NPC here is unfortunately gone, but they have left an item behind, and that item is the Priestess Heart, as well as the Flowerstone Gavel weapon. While you're here, you'll also want to interact with the altar itself. You can choose the option Communion with Bayle, and here you'll be able to choose between one of two incantations. I believe New Game Plus is required if you want both. Before thinking you've finished everything, you'll want to also go back and pay Igon a visit if you haven't already killed him, unlike me. He should be in that same area we spoke to him earlier, where we found the two dragons fighting near the foot of the Jagged Peak Site of Grace. If you go here, he should now be dead, but you will be able to loot him in order to grab all of his items and his bearing. Now let's go over our items real quick. We did receive the Flowerstone Gavel, which is a piercing hammer. I haven't had a lot of chance to play with it, but it does scale with strength, dex, and arcane. And additionally, we've received a consumable that we can use an infinite amount of times, which is the Priestess Heart, and that turns our human frame into an ancient dragon and boosts dragon cult incantations. In order to use it, you won't be allowed to wear any armor, and you'll also need to be in an area that isn't completely safe. You can now go ahead and have fun with your new unlocks. Thank you so much for watching. Share the video with a friend, drop a like, and hopefully I see you in the next one. Peace.